Matthew Evans, a man who had spent a lifetime accumulating wealth, sat alone in his sleek silver Mercedes, a slight sheen of sweat on his brow as the Kentucky heat pressed in through the windows. Um, the air conditioning buzzed, barely keeping the sweltering warmth at bay. In his late 70s, Matthew had known every luxury and comfort money could buy, from private jets to lavish parties, but that afternoon, he found himself in an unfamiliar position. Stranded on a quiet stretch of road, miles from his perfectly kept mansion, his car had succumbed to a flat tire. The tires of his world, it seemed, had come to a halt too. Matthew had always believed that in life, his money could fix anything. His influence could turn any situation around. But today, even his wealth had no power over the situation. After several failed attempts to call for roadside assistance, he had to face the reality that he'd have to wait. Something he wasn't accustomed to. The frustration bubbled up as he drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, but just as his irritation reached its peak, something unexpected happened. He spotted a figure in the distance. A young boy, maybe 13 or 14, walking with a sense of purpose down the deserted road. The boy wore an old t-shirt, and his sneakers were so worn down that the soles seemed like they had seen years of use. Yet there was something about the boy's demeanor, his steady stride, and the quiet determination in his eyes that drew Matthew in. He spotted a figure in the distance. He grabbed Matthew's hand desperately and held on. He looked at Matthew in the eyes. The boy smiled with his other hand. As the boy approached, Matthew couldn't help but notice how calm and confident he appeared, despite his obvious lack of material wealth. The boy stopped in front of the car, scanning it briefly, before giving a polite nod to Matthew. "Got a flat, sir?" the boy asked, his voice steady, almost professional. Matthew, taken aback by the boy's composure, nodded. Yes, I do. My phone doesn't seem to have any signal, and I was hoping for some help." He was going to tell him what happened, but paused, remembering his promise. The boy's face softened, his lips forming a small, almost humble smile. "I can help with that." Without hesitation, he knelt beside the tire, his hands already reaching for the necessary tools as though he had done it countless times before. "My grandpa taught me last summer," the boy added, almost nonchalantly. Do you have a spare?" Laughing, Matthew pointed to the trunk, still processing what was happening. He watched as the boy pulled out the spare tire and the tools, his hands moving quickly but with a kind of quiet confidence that seemed beyond his years. Matthew stood there, feeling an odd humility creeping in, something he hadn't experienced in decades. He had always been the one to give, the one in control. But this boy, this stranger, was doing something for him without any expectation of anything in return. It was a foreign concept for someone who had spent his life trading favors and deals. A few minutes later, the tire was changed, the boy wiped his hands on his jeans, stood up, and offered a simple, satisfied smile. "All done." Matthew reached into his wallet, pulling out a few bills, but the boy took a step back, raising a hand in polite refusal. "Thank you, sir, but I don't need anything. Just happy to help." Matthew stood, frozen for a moment, his offer of money still extended in his hand, as the boy turned and began walking down the road without a second glance. It was strange. He felt moved by the boy's gesture, but he couldn't explain why. There was something about the way the boy had helped him, with no expectation, no ulterior motive. Later that day, as Matthew sat alone in his opulent home, his mind couldn't shake the image of the boy, his modest clothes, the simplicity of his life. Yet, he had shown a kind of dignity and integrity that Matthew hadn't seen in years. It was something pure, untouched by wealth or status. He had no idea why, but he found himself needing to know more about this boy. The next morning, Matthew couldn't ignore the pull in his chest. He decided to find the boy. After hours of searching, asking at gas stations and diners, he finally received a lead from an elderly woman at a small cafe. Sounds like you're talking about Elijah, the woman said, her voice warm but tired. That boy's always helping folks. He lives with his mama over in Harlan. Harlan? Matthew repeated, making a mental note. Thank you. Harlan was a small town nestled in the foothills of the Appalachians, a place Matthew had never been. The drive to Harlan was scenic, but Matthew barely noticed the beauty around him. His mind was preoccupied, wondering what kind of life the boy led, what kind of family raised him. When Matthew arrived, the town felt like a different world. Modest homes and small businesses lined the streets. He asked a few locals about Elijah, and eventually he was directed to a humble house on the edge of town. The house was old but clean, with a porch that sagged slightly under its own weight. Matthew hesitated for a moment before knocking on the door. A woman in her early 40s answered, her tired eyes sharp and curious as she assessed him. Can I help you? She asked. Oh, good morning, Matthew said, clearing his throat. I'm sorry to bother you, but I believe I met your son yesterday. Elijah, right? He helped me with a flat tire. The woman's expression softened. That sounds like my Elijah, she said with a smile. He's always helping folks. So, I just wanted to thank him properly, Matthew said. He wouldn't accept anything from me yesterday. She stepped aside to let him in. He's out back. You're welcome to wait. Matthew followed her to the backyard where Elijah was busy repairing the fence. The boy looked up, surprised to see Matthew standing there. Matthew skinned. Hey, mister, Elijah said, wiping his hands on his jeans. What are you doing here? Matthew smiled, feeling a bit nervous, a feeling he hadn't had in years. I wanted to thank you again. You helped me when I really needed it, and I just couldn't stop thinking about it. Elijah shrugged, his expression unchanged. It wasn't a big deal, but to Matthew it was. The simplicity of Elijah's gesture had struck him deeply. He was determined to show his appreciation, though he wasn't sure how. For her response to his gesture, she added yet another detail to every piece of Elijah. There was only one thing that really mattered to him. You don't realize what a big deal it was, Matthew said, his voice quiet but firm. People don't usually help strangers without expecting something in return. Elijah looked at him, puzzled. I don't see it like that. If someone needs help and I can do it, why wouldn't I? Matthew was silent for a moment, absorbing the boy's words. The fence was patched together with mismatched wood, the grass sparse and uneven. It was clear Elijah's family didn't have much, but they made do with what they had. It was a stark contrast to the life Matthew had built, one of abundance, but also loneliness. You got a good head on your shoulders, Matthew said, meaning it. Your mother must be proud. Elijah grinned. She works hard. I just try to help out where I can. Matthew felt a pang of nostalgia, remembering his own childhood, the values his parents had instilled in him. His family had taught him the importance of hard work and perseverance, but somewhere along the way, he had lost sight of those lessons. I'd like to do something for you and your family, Matthew said at last. You've given me something I didn't know I was missing. Elijah's expression turned cautious. We're okay, mister. We don't need anything. It's not about need, Matthew insisted. It's about what's right. You helped me, and I'd like to return the favor. Before Elijah could respond, his mother appeared on the porch, calling to her son to come inside for lunch. She looked at Matthew and then invited him in. Would you care to join us? It's nothing fancy, but you're welcome. Matthew hesitated, unused to such a gesture, but the warmth in her voice left no room for excuses. I'd like that, he said, following her inside. So, the kitchen smelled of freshly baked bread, and the small table was set with care, though the chairs were mismatched. Matthew felt out of place in his tailored suit, but there was something comforting about the space. The conversation flowed easily as Elijah shared stories about school, and his mother spoke with quiet pride about their small community. For the first time in years, Matthew felt a warmth he hadn't realized he was missing. As they ate, Matthew found himself reflecting on his own life, his wealth, his success, but also his emptiness. This family, with her modest home and humble life, had something that his mansion could never provide: connection.